This is the Welcome to Humanity podcast with thought leader and transformative psychiatrist, Dr. Fred Moss. This show focuses on the betterment of humanity on a global scale. Each episode will leave you enlightened, inspired, and ready to make an impact in your world. Welcome to the show. Welcome to your life. Welcome to humanity. Here's Dr. Fred.
Welcome to another edition of the Welcome to Humanity podcast. And I've been saying with each and every podcast recently that one of the greatest opportunities of actually hosting a podcast is I get to meet people either that I've never met or meet people who I claim to know but really don't know yet. And then I get to do that in sort of a semi-private public setting like a podcast and get to explore with these people, my friends, my colleagues, my co-humans, the people who are up to things in the world. I get to explore with them what's important. And today is no exception to that. In fact, today, we have someone who's been a friend of mine for, Jan, about 4 years or so, 4 or 5 years now, where we've been crossing our paths in some growth and development work that we've both done. And we also share a whole lot of interests and, in fact, even professional interests, as well as personal and family and all sorts of arenas. So, and I would say, I know Janet Flaton. That's what I would say. If someone asked me, I'd say, I know Janet Flaton. But I think I'm about to learn that I didn't know Janet Flaton. And we're going to get another sort of deeper dive or bigger cut into who Janet Flaton is today. Janet Flaton is the guest on the Welcome to Humanity podcast with the deepest honor and deepest privilege. Welcome to Humanity, Janet. It's great to have you here.
Thank you so much, Fred. So excited to be here, and I really appreciate you inviting me.
Well, it's really, really, really spectacular to have you. Each and every one of us is really dealing with something, right? No matter whether we're tackling some of the big problems in the world or maybe even the tiny ones, we all face challenges. Now, I've been a psychiatrist for many years, and I've worked with all kinds of people from all walks of life. I've worked with more people than I can really count, from various backgrounds, dealing with more issues than you can imagine, of all sizes and shapes. So naturally, over time, I've developed a number of ways to assist others in gaining a new sense of freedom and empowerment. Now, I'm pulling back the curtain on one of those methodologies, and I'm going public, revealing the process and associated mindset that contributed to using this particular method with maximum effectiveness. It's all laid out in my new book called Creative 8, Healing Through Creativity and Self-Expression. You can pick this book up on Amazon.com in either Kindle or paperback format. And as a listener to the Welcome to Humanity podcast, I'd like to offer you a completely free copy in audiobook format. Just go to welcometohumanity.net/creative and download your free audiobook copy of Creative 8 today. I really look forward to hearing about your Creative 8 breakthrough. Now, let's get back to this amazing conversation. Welcome to Humanity. It's an organic conversation we have on Welcome to Humanity. And one of the things that I've been thinking about as I was preparing for our conversation is that we really could go down any of easily 6 or 8 paths that would lead to pay dirt, right? We could go down 6 or 8 paths, you and I, and wonder with each other what's coming next, distinct paths that would lead towards gold. And so let's make that very clear that the conversation that we're about to have isn't down any of those 8 paths. We're going to take a conversation down the path that we do, and we're going to find what we find. But isn't it interesting that we can start off now and get that, we could talk about this and go there for a whole hour, and that you, unlike most people in my life, we really could go down 6 or 8 paths and explore together and find some things that neither of us knew about each other or about life.
That is so true. Since you asked me to come on this, I've been in my mind having a conversation with myself, asking the questions that I think that you'll ask and answering them, and realizing that I'm actually having a conversation with myself and not you, and that I actually have no idea what we're going to talk about, because there are myriad topics that we could talk about. And I'm really intrigued in what's going to come out today. Yeah,
that's great. Well, that's wonderful. And so I think we've set up our listeners well, and maybe set up both of us well. So here we are at the edge of the diving board, and I hear the water's warm, and it's certainly deep enough, and it's welcoming us. So let's dive in. And here, take my hand and let's dive in. So one of the questions that I like to ask my guests, it's going to maybe feel for a moment, and if you've heard a few of these, you've already heard that this is the question I'm going to ask, maybe confronting for a moment, but in the end, you'll see that it's really a question that everyone wants to know, including you. And that goes like this. So, Janet Flaton, who are you?
Well, I actually have heard you ask that question, and I have been in that inquiry. And, what comes to me at first is there's so much that I almost go to where I can't even think about who am I. There's just so much. How do you express? I mean, I'm 60 years old. I've been through so many versions of lifetimes, and all of them have had their challenges, and all of them have been beyond anything I can imagine. And they've given me who I am. So what occurred to me is, first was that I'm all and I'm nothing. and what I just said. And the other thing is multifaceted, as though if you were to look at, a shape of like a three-dimensional shape, like an octagon or whatever a three-dimensional would be of an octagon, or like a diamond, that has facets, and each aspect of it has, there's a side and another side and another side, and each of those sides engages with a different aspect of life and humanity. I think that's a good start.
I think it's a great start. And I think that's, in fact, anyone who even has an inkling of being able to say that they know Janet Flaton there'd be no protest to the self-declaration that you're multifaceted at all. Of course, we're all multifaceted, but no, I'm not talking about that level of multifaceted. I'm talking about Dr. Janet Flaton's multifaceted. And, we bring the word doctor in here now. And so at least one of the things that both of us get to sort of hang around with is the idea that we're physicians. And, that's only a part of who I am. And I know that you see it as only a part of who you are. But I also know that it's a part that you're both proud of, you wear with authority, and you explore from that domain. Like, it's important that you're a physician. It's important that you're a doctor. At some level, it carries some degree of an importance. Would you care to expound a little bit on what this conversation or that question brings up for you?
You really nailed it. I think that, when people retire, some people get to retire and never actually stop being who they became. And I think being a physician is one of those things that I will always be a physician. And I also see that, for me, it was something that just kind of, as many things have in my life, it's like I've been led through my life by these sort of thunderbolts that come from the sky out of nowhere, seemingly not knowing what I want, not knowing where I want to go or what's next for me. And then all of a sudden something comes to me. And there was that moment in college when I was having a conversation with my TA in my biology class. I was a math major, so I just took biology. I was thinking about dental school. And when I was in that class and I had this conversation with her and she talked about going to med school, it's the first time I entertained that idea. And then I began to really inquire into it. And I saw that it was the one area, like I loved math, but at the end of the proof that we had explored in that particular class, that was the end of it. And there was just a point where I was no longer inspired by it. And I couldn't see myself being, really like moved through my life, pursuing math. And it was in exploring what medicine could be that it brought all the different parts of what was important to me, which was my love of science, my being with people, and I love children. I've always loved children. And I think even at that age of knowing that I wanted my life to be for something, like because I was here, that it made a difference. And I wouldn't have put it in those terms at that time. But yeah, that's what led me forward. And it wasn't an easy route because I didn't come from a family that, I came from a family of engineers. I didn't come from a background in which I knew how to navigate through that. And I actually went through the whole process, worked very hard. I had attention deficit disorder and I never knew it. So I was working very, very hard to get high grades in a math curriculum and pre-med combined. And then when I got to the end of it, and I applied with the money that I made over the summer working as a lifeguard, and I got rejected from every single school. And I remember coming in with that last letter and just collapsing on the floor and sobbing, and my roommate turning on a Frank Sinatra song, "You're going to pick you back up and put you back in." and acting it out, pantomiming it out for me. And another professor that I ran into on campus, when he found out that he had written a letter for me, and then when he found out that I hadn't been accepted and that I wasn't going to try anymore, there was just this moment where the look on his face that I decided to go ahead and do it again. And I spent that entire summer after graduation working in a job that I really hated. I was working as a technician in a chemical plant. And I studied for my MCATs, and that's what I did. I worked and I studied, and I brought my MCAT scores up, and I applied again. And the man asked me, the person interviewing me asked me, what is it that you'll do if you don't get into med school? And I looked at him dead in the eye and I said, I will apply again, because I'm not going to be a doctor. And it took going through what I went through to actually come to that authentic place. And that was it. So I haven't taken the straight and narrow path through all of this. I went on and did become a pediatrician after looking at a lot of different areas and being inspired by a lot of different areas. But really what pulled me to pediatrics was the children and the future of working with children, their future, and the future of the world. And, I could go on about children, but finding myself over here, working in the world of attention deficit disorder or ADHD and exploring that over the last 15 or something years. I never thought that I would end up here, because my program when I was going through residency was a very intensive care oriented program. And when I came out, what I was really doing was my first job that I took after doing locum tenens around the country was in this little town on the central coast of California. And we had nothing here. We just had these two hospitals, but we had a lot of sick babies and a lot of sick kids. And I got to use all those skills that I got out of residency. And I got to be what I would consider a real doctor. And that is in me. It is part of me. It will never go away, even though I don't do that anymore. And I do a completely different aspect of medicine, which is behavioral medicine. And I work with adults now. There is that relatedness to, I'm just going to say one other thing. And that is that when I was looking into, just kind of looking at what is it that I want to do with my life. And I just remember my dad saying, he became an engineer. And the reason he became an engineer is because he knew that he would always be challenged by it, that he would never become bored by it. And that's what I feel that medicine gives me, is that every day I'm challenged by it. Every day I don't have answers. And every day I grow, and I grow with my patients and the result of my patients.
Fabulous. So, one of the things that's just great. And wow. Thanks for the history, and thanks for putting me up to speed with some of your path. One of the things that we don't know, we didn't know about each other till right now, is how similar my path was through medical school, including being rejected by all schools in the first year, including breaking down and crying. I don't think I have the Sinatra song exactly, but I have this. I do have the That's Life scenario, which of course was the soundtrack for my all-time favorite movie, which is The Joker, which came out last year. And so that is the soundtrack for that. That's a critical soundtrack for that movie last year. And anyways, this whole idea of getting back up, getting back on your feet and going again after a summer of working a job that I hated, to get that done because I was not going to be denied to be a physician. And then much of what you said afterwards, I also have sort of echoing pathways of how it went as I became a physician, my history as a locum tenens. We share a lot of experience that makes sense, given that we already declared that we share a lot of experiences, that this is just another set of experiences for which we resonate together. So thank you for sharing that with us about how you got to be who you got to be. And one of the things I'm really hearing is, I jotted down the word determination and I jotted down the word passion. And this notion of determination, this combination of determination and passion. And then, your self-declared love for science, for people, for children. Can't say enough about children, and then finding yourself taking on the thing that was, in a lot of ways, the thing that was the hurdle you had to take on to get here. Like your life is committed to taking on for others the hurdle that nearly prevented you from being able to take on that which you're not taking on. It's really fascinating that attention deficit disorder, or I'm going to ask you to give us a little distinction here. I heard you correct yourself from attention deficit disorder to ADHD. And I'd like you to kind of tell us a little bit about who you are right now in the world of attention. If people don't know you as that person, they certainly should. Who you are in the world of attention deficit disorder, ADD, ADHD. Who is Dr. Janet Flaton in that world, in that industry today?
So when you're asking me who I am, is it what are my commitments or what is it I see with it or what am I actually doing?
How would one know you? Who are you in the industry? Like, what are you counted on in demand for? What are people, when they come for you, associated with your connection with ADD, ADHD, or attention deficit disorder? Who are you in that field? Why would anyone be interested in what you have to say about anything in that field?
What people come to me for, whether they know it in the beginning or not, I would say very, very quickly discover it, is that I'm an empowering context for ADHD. And some of, I want to acknowledge Ed Hallowell in his work, because he was the first one that I ever heard speak of ADHD in that manner. Because before that, it was really more, these kids that would come into me that had, they were struggling. They were having problems with their relationships in their families. They were, flunking out of school. And that was all that I was hearing. And I was fortunate enough to have a colleague that he specialized in this, and he gave me more and a deeper cut on what ADHD really was and gave me some approaches from a medical, like from a pharmacological point of view, but also from just an understanding more of really what's going on behind the curtain here. And I started, just to get back a little bit, at that point, I was working as a pediatrician, and I was having I was having a lot of kids coming in who were doing checkups and colds and, regular stuff. But there were a couple of areas where I saw that I could make a difference. And one was in saving babies that were delivered and that I needed to resuscitate them. And then I started to discover in this area that I could, with the modalities that I had at hand, give this child an access to going from being an F student to an A student, to having friends, to integrating into the family in a way that they're no longer the problem, but actually someone that everybody loved having around. And so when I separated off from doing general pediatrics to doing my own practice for ADHD, well, all I was having was people coming in with kids with ADD. And what I started, what I was hearing over and over again is, my child has all of these problems, yes, but, as the tears are coming out about all of that, there were also tears for the brilliance they were seeing in their children.
Isn't that true? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That they could, they were teaching themselves how to play guitar, or they were an amazing artist, or they could take Legos without any instructions and build some kind of amazing structure, and on and on. And at first I'm thinking, all parents that are, all parents love their kids and think they're amazing. But then they started actually showing me the results. And, I started meeting more of these kids, and I saw there was something to this. And then it was around that time that I read Ed Hallowell's book, Delivered from Distraction. And this was in around 2003. And he gave me language for that phenomenon, so that I was able to begin to be able to, instead of, oh, I'm sorry, your child has this life sentence, basically, of always struggling, and we'll just help them with medication, I was able to say, congratulations.
Wow.
You have someone here who, yes, this is going to be a little bit of an extra, it's going to be an extra challenge for you to raise this child, but you know what? You're up to it, because you're the one who had him or her. And you're also in this process going to be giving the world somebody extraordinary who's going to make a difference. And that was what I was saying back in 2003. And I get letters back now. I get letters back from people that I saw 15 years ago and that it happened. And then in the way that I practice today, I'm seeing those results with far more velocity. So what's hanging up over my desk in my office is a poster that my staff put together back in, I think it was around 2010 or 2011. And it's a beautiful graphic of famous people. And everybody knows these people. They're Ross Perot, they're Edgar Allan Poe, Bill Gates, Columbus, Babe Ruth, Elvis Presley, Lewis and Clark, Ansel Adams, Abraham Lincoln, Albert Einstein, Michael Phelps, John Lennon, and on, right? And right now I'm doing all my appointments by Zoom, but when people would come into my office and sit down on the couch, and we would kind of be getting organized and getting ready to start, and they'd be looking around the room, whether they acknowledged it or not, they always found it, because when I would bring it up later, they had already seen it. Or if they hadn't, when they did see it, they dove in deeply. And this is the way that it's just an amazing gift to have this as a way to introduce people to, this is your community. This is who you are. And guess what? If you go on Google and you type in famous people who have failed, you will find the same people. So thank you so much for letting me talk and run on about the thing that I love to talk about.
No, keep going. You're doing great. Please.
except my daughter, that one as well. It occurred to me one day that when we say, you're distracted, you're not brain dead when you're distracted.
Nope.
You're somewhere else, and you're somewhere where no one else has ever been, most likely.
Yeah. That's great.
And then from there, you're probably going to go, somewhere else from there and somewhere else from there. And, the Wright brothers, how did they put that thing up in the sky? They're up there on that poster, right? Mm-hmm. They were sitting in class, not, probably not hearing anything about the spelling lesson, but extraordinary at math. So what I say is, to the degree that you're impaired, so where you're distracted, you're innovative, you're visionary, to where you're impulsive, you're creative, you're spontaneous, to where you're hyperactive, you're energetic and athletic and agile. And I mentioned a number of those people, right? So to the degree that you're impaired, to the degree you're gifted, and I'll tell you one other little piece that sort of was the aha moment, was I think this was around the time that I discovered Dr. Hallowell's book, was my daughter was in 4th grade and their assignment was to do a biography. And each one of the kids had, a famous person. And my daughter's was Amelia Earhart. And our job as the parents was to assist them in writing their first paper. So I was very involved with this, and they got to take on the persona of that particular person, and she dressed up as Amelia Earhart, and she got up there and she gave the presentation, and I went for that. And as we were writing that paper, what I noticed, because this is when I was beginning to explore the whole world of ADHD in my private practice, and noticing that there was more to it than just, I'm going to treat with medication. What I saw was that Amelia had a lot of symptoms in family history, social history, that people that I was seeing with ADHD had. I thought, isn't that interesting? And I think this was before I read Ed Hallowell's book. And then I went and I was listening to her, and then afterwards I stuck around and listened to some of the other kids. And one after the next, because they were not just telling about their achievements, they were telling their whole story. And the same thing. And it was after this that I came to the place of, oh my gosh, who I'm working with. How fortunate am I to get to be the vessel in which, these children get to access that aspect of themselves, that I get to be along the journey for them to become who they are to be in the world. So, there's a lot back around that time, there was a lot of stigma around ADHD, and, it was all negative, and people were I think there's still a lot of stigma, but it's not like it was. I'm still actually very surprised at how much stigma there can be, right?
Yeah.
But because my whole world is, if I look at somebody who's really creative, innovative, and I'm thinking, oh, you're ADHD, I'm thinking, lucky you.
Right.
But the whole world isn't at that place. And that's really actually my vision for the world, is that the whole world does get present to that. Because, if you're looking at the percentages of what we guesstimate ADHD to be, somewhere around, 8 to 12% of school-age children, and maybe 6 to 8% of adults. But I think adults are probably underdiagnosed because they've learned ways to compensate. Let's just say 1/10 of the population has this thing, right? And what if it was, and a while ago, somebody said this when I was standing in line at some store. I don't know how it came up, but he said, I heard ADHD is attention developed to a higher dimension. And that's what I wrote my paper from, is truly that area where if you have ADHD, you are interested and engaged, you will take it beyond. And so what if that 10% of the population actually lived into its full potential? What would that mean not only for that person, but for humanity? Because now we've put that 10%, a large percentage of which are not working socially, financially, anywhere near what their capacity is, and very depressed about that, because at the point where everything's kind of lined up, they can see how great they can be, and people have seen it, and they use that against themselves, and people have used it against them as well, and they're stuck in that. And it can be as extreme as a very large proportion of that population is also incarcerated out of impulsive behaviors and addiction, and, paying for those addictions. So what if you were to take that 10% and put them in the driver's seat of their own lives? What could that mean? That was also something that kind of hit me like a lightning bolt, where I suddenly realized that what my work was for is for the people I'm working with, but is actually to get this word out into the world so that we can, on so many levels, impact, our future. Because it's I guess I'm getting it all in here. But in that moment, I saw, we have Waldorf schools, we have Montessori schools. Somebody had an idea to start a school, and that school became popular enough that it became global. Well, what if we had a school that actually began in daycare? The children of families because this is highly, highly hereditary. I was just reading a paper that my daughter, who's a neuroscience major, just graduated from UCLA, and knows way more about the whole scientific aspect of this than I do. It's 73% heritable. And you have families that are dealing with this, and then they get put their child, straight out, instead of, mom goes to work and that baby goes to a place that is designed to take care of babies with these special sensitivities and needs. And then they matriculate naturally when they're ready, when they're developmentally ready, because kids with ADD have a more splayed development in all the different areas. And so if they're met wherever it is that they are developing, then there's no breakdown and negative behaviors occurring that they begin to relate themselves through or as. And so those children will matriculate when ready into a more of a preschool environment, and then into a more of, a second, but it just all flows. And eventually it gets up into secondary school. As they're moving through this, their natural gifts and talents are being nurtured and cultivated. And it's in a context of belonging. There's nothing wrong. And there's a way to work with those behaviors that people who are working with these children get the children, so those behaviors don't show up. They get the exercise they need. They're eating the way that they should be eating. They're not on technology all day. They're out exploring in nature, and they're working and playing. They're playing in the area that is what is of most interest to them. And that actually is what fuels the areas that aren't as much of interest to them, so that they get those skills that they need. And then by the time that they're partway through elementary school and definitely into secondary school, they have a sense of who they are and what they're being called for to do in the world. And they're doing it in collaboration with other human beings that have different abilities, but the similar capacity. And that there are schools like this going on around the world. That would be kind of like the petri dish for leadership, right? So I had that idea, and I've just been kind of nurturing that and sharing it. And in the meantime, what I've been doing is, so what I see is that's working forward. What we're dealing with right now is working backwards. And that's what I do, is I have people who come to me who are, it's interesting that by the time that you get to be a college student or an adult or even a high school student, that what you're dealing with isn't bouncing around the room and climbing on structures. What you're dealing with is anxiety, perfectionism, depression, overwhelm, flashbacks, and I should have the whole list here, but I can tell you it's not the 18 diagnostic criteria for ADHD that we do on the Connor. And so they're going to psychiatrists and getting treated for those symptoms and nobody's actually noticing that it could be ADHD. And so the work that I do with people is they come in and I listen to what is it that you're dealing with. Let's do this in bullet point, because people come in expecting that I'm going to give them a diagnosis and put them on medication that day very often, or they come in knowing that the kind of work that I do is going to not be that way. And so what I do is I just want to hear the bullet points. So we'll get into the nitty gritty later, but the bullet points. And then what is it that you would like to accomplish out of working with me? And I get that takes about 45 minutes to an hour. And I get a very clear sense of what they're dealing with, what their particular flavor of ADHD is. And I could talk about that at some point if you'd like. But then I bring them back for an educational session. This is how the brain works. This is how ADHD shows up. These are the things that are causing it to get better. These are the things that are making it worse. These are things that we can put in place in terms of structures that could help support you, and give them the whole picture. And then they come back, and very often what happens next is I sit down with them at the computer and help them devise a calendar and a prioritization system, because that's lacking and anxiety producing. And I help them work through whatever anxiety or whatever blockages they have in the process and build it the way that it works for them, such that now they can take all of that that's going on inside their brain and take it out of their brain, so that they can begin to have the space to reconnect with that intuitive, innovative aspect of them that gives them their discovery of who they really are. So in that process, it's very, customized, because one person may need to work on structures, another person may need to work on parenting, another person may need to work on their nutrition or their sleep or, their exercise or a big part of it is their conversations about themselves. Very big part of it. Also, what I've been working with more in the last couple of years is helping them to distinguish how much of it is just the programming in their brain, otherwise known as the mind, versus them, so they can begin to distinguish and get somewhat distant from being driven by those thoughts, which has them to pull the covers over their head.
Yeah, this is great. Yeah, this is fabulous. It's unbelievable. So thank you. And, you spoke to so much in this last set of so much of who you are. Again, jotting down terms, which isn't how I handle every interview, by the way, Janet, but it's clearly what I'm doing here. Just like, what comes to mind as she's speaking? The word that came to mind, and I put it in all capital letters, is this word champion. And, it isn't just being a champion. Like, it has a lot of connotations and denotations. And in this case, it's like you are a champion. I mean, you're a first place gold medal champion. I also know you as a swimmer, as a co-swimmer as well. And, I've seen you swim, actually, and it's quite a remarkable swimmer in the water. And there's something about You're welcome. And there's something about who you are as a champion athlete, as a champion woman, as a champion physician, as a first run, fierce champion. And this is not leaving your opposition behind you. This is just drawing everyone forward with you as a champion. And then the next place I have it, which is, I think, so blatantly and totally obvious, is who you are as a champion for the people who have this, attention developed to a higher dimension condition, and or for people who think that they have attention deficit disorder or an affliction, a disease, an illness, and instead seeing it that way, like immediately shifting that disempowering context from one of just leaving someone, hopeless or disgruntled, to seeing what might be here or what can be here, what is here, for what it means to have this condition that might be a superlative way of experiencing the world, like who you get to be as a champion for that population, which you're not sure, and I think none of us are sure, whether or not it's 8 or 12% of this population or 6 to 10% of that population. But we are sure that this population includes some of the players that you mentioned that for you and put down your poster, and people who, it seems, all the, like you said, the petri dish of leadership that arises from the population that is, it can be described or delineated by having signs or symptoms associated with this so-called affliction, is pretty endless. I mean, we start seeing a direct one-to-one correlation between having this condition and just creating massive, incredible results in the world around us, not only in the world of creativity, but in maybe all worlds. Not everyone you named was simply an artist. And we have some politicians, some scientists, some, all walks of life, some creators. So champion comes out. And, I'd like to hear what you have to say about that before I go to the next one, because the next one's actually a deeper cut than that, believe it or not.
Thank you. Here's the deal. If you look at humanity in terms of this thing called ADHD, right? Like, we have this thing called disorder, and disorder, if you break it down, means not order, like not working. We turn it into something, far more personal, but it really is that you have a spectrum, right? And if you were to look at this normal curve, you would see in the normal curve, the bell curve, in the middle are the majority of people. Mm-hmm. And you would say that the majority of, if you were to look at these tendencies of attention deficit, hyperactivity, and impulsivity, that everybody has that at times. But it's when it goes, as you move along that continuum, when it begins to impact your life in such a way that it causes a loss of performance and quality, then we call it a DIA disorder. So it's ADH, mm-hmm. but then it becomes D disorder. And for those who are wondering, mm-hmm. people have heard ADD and heard ADHD. It's, the nomenclature today is inattentive type is the ADD, and the ADHD, hyperactive, impulsive, and combined are the ADHD. Mm-hmm. So you could look at it as, if you have a population that is the largest population, society gets built based on what meets the needs of the majority, not because it's partial that way, but simply because it's functional. You're going to put in mm-hmm. only so many resources as you need for that neurotypical 5-year-old for kindergarten. And then when mm-hmm. that 5-year-old becomes an 8-year-old that, in kindergarten is 3 hours a day going and singing songs and learning letters and painting and, and then goes home. But by the time that they're 8 years old, they're sitting sitting at a desk and doing worksheets the majority of the day and getting very little exercise, that 8-year-old ADD kid doesn't flourish in that environment. They may not have done that great in the kindergarten, but it was more acceptable. That the separation, the disparity occurs as they grow older. And it's during that time that they begin to distinguish themselves, and something's wrong, I don't belong, and they begin to find compensatory mechanisms that may or may not work for them as a way to try and resolve, whatever those differences are. And so when you say champion, basically what is missing is an awareness. It needs to be placed in place of simply more resources for those people in the tail end of that curve. And when those resources are in place, then those children will thrive. And what I often say to people is, if you were to take that tail end of the normal curve and put them on their own island, then you would have a whole new normal curve. And then you would have a whole different set of resources, and then most of them would thrive, and there would still be some kids that were, that would be having more difficulty, but less of them, right? Which is the whole idea of the global school, is you create kind of that island. But that's what of course this is personal for me, because
of course it's personal, which by the way goes to the next segue, but of course it's personal.
Yes, because
go ahead,
I can't tell you how many times I hear stories and I can relate to some aspect of it.
Exactly.
Or if I can't relate, like I can relate through my daughter, I can relate through my family, or I can relate through my friends,
Look, it's not a matter of relating. It's beyond relating. It's like hyper resonance. It's not, relating is, I can see what you mean, or I know somebody like that, but that's not it. We're not talking that. We're talking about relating to the core of your bones. We're talking about resonating with these features at a level that most of us don't get to experience, being able to do something about the resonating you are with these folks is what I'm hearing.
And that is where the passion comes in, because I see what's possible. And I also see, somebody said something to me about my speaking and sharing the purpose of it is so that others don't have to go through everything that I went through. Like they can maybe learn some things that I'm sharing instead of having to figure it all out by themselves. I think that's where my passion is what's possible when people discover this early, and that they can give their life to whatever it is that they love, rather than having to push that boulder up the hill because that hill wasn't built for them, right? The hill was built for a larger community. And I want to, be clear too, is that people with ADD are still part of that community. Like having ADHD isn't different. It's along the spectrum. It's on the continuum of normal human behaviors. And there isn't a place where you suddenly are ADHD or you aren't ADHD. And so many of the factors that I bring into play with resources that support people is it does move people along that continuum. But yes, is that resonance that you're speaking of that has me passionate. And there was a time when I was angry about it, right? I was waking up to the fact of how many times I'd been misunderstood and invalidated, and places where I didn't get a chance to go to do the things that, like the reason I didn't get into medical school was because I didn't do well on the MCAT. I didn't do well on the MCAT because people with ADHD have typically, not always, but most of the time, have a harder time taking standardized tests. And thank goodness for what has been put in place in the meantime, because of the greater awareness and understanding of this, that people can now get extended time for testing in separate days for, in split time, so that they have a shot at being able to get the same measurement and show probably, more of the fraction that they know.
Yeah.
So
it's interesting. Okay, there's two things. Number one, while you've been talking, there was this thing about, physician heal thyself, which is I looked it up as you were speaking, like where it actually comes from Luke 4. I wasn't sure if it was from like Hippocrates or where it actually landed back in the day. And there's something like the opportunity, that a real doctor should be able to prove his or her credentials by correctly diagnosing and treating whatever ailment he or she suffer from personally. And that it was, yeah, right. It's pretty cool, right? I mean, that's what we're talking about here. That even resonated larger than the word champion, which is, that's the next section that I was bringing forth, is that you and I, by the way, in this case, what you're speaking of is this just fierce opportunity to take on what otherwise could have been declared a deficit or could have been declared an outlaw, a producer of outlying disempowerment for your entire life. Like, had you fallen for the idea that there was just an immovable boulder that had to be pushed uphill for the rest of your life, that might have not led for you to eventually be a victory over so much of your past and be a champion for this population in such a way that you not only relate but resonate with, and in such a way that you get to ride this tide from back in the day, not so long ago, where the level of what did you call it? The level of disdain
stigma,
that we had for ADD kids, Yeah, the level of stigma back in the day. Yeah, you're still a stigma, but it's a funny stigma now. It's almost like a stigma that, compared to what it was anyways. I mean, back in the day, these kids were just discardable. Our friends who had ADD, and luckily it wasn't like, I was close enough without actually being tossed off the island. They were discardable. They were not going to learn, and they were kind of the dumb kids, or they weren't going to catch on to the worksheets that we were being served up in third grade. And that isn't that anymore. And you've been able to ride the tide and then create these dreams, or these maybe even more than dreams. Dreams, might say something like it's a pipe dream, but it's not. This vision of your global school is something that can really happen in this lifetime. I'm not only in this lifetime, like sooner with velocity. And, it makes sense. It not only makes sense, it's like you now have the skills and you now have the tools necessary to be a source for something like this global school in, like, right here, right now, for this population that has been really your whole life, resonating from physician heal thyself, and then growing into who you've been for the entire world, and really who you are for the entire world. That's what we're talking about here. I mean, you may not have known that while you were speaking, but that's what we're talking about. We're talking about, shining a different light on an otherwise disempowered population that was prepared to go down as disempowered, with you reminding them that not only are they empowered, but they may be specially gifted at a higher dimension. That's some kind of responsibility that this life has brought upon you.
Exactly.
So congratulations.
Well, thank you. And I almost feel like I don't have anything to do with it. Yeah.
Exactly.
I mean, there are many times that I just would be happy, kind of forget the whole thing, and go back to life as it was, where, it was far more cookie cutter.
Yeah, sure.
It's, as unpredictable as it would be being a pediatrician and never knowing when you would have a kid come in that was going to bottom out. That was the rarity. This thing that I'm doing right now, it's like in completely uncharted territory. Like, I had a very 7-year training to get to being a pediatrician. And this here has been so much of just kind of forging on. And sometimes it can be really hard. Especially when, it happens still, when people don't see what it is that I'm attempting to communicate, and they don't take the opportunity. And I always see that, any person that doesn't step into this opportunity, it's not, like you said, it's not just for them. It's how many people that do step into it, the impact that they're going to have on the world. And I do have that conversation probably around the third session, is, I am interested in you being able to study and get good grades and pass and get a job and all that. But, that's not actually really what I'm here with you for. I'm here with you to source you, to support you in finding who you really are and what you're here to do for the rest of the world. And that's how I make a difference in the world. So thank you.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Spectacular. That's spectacular, Janet. Really beautiful. And, I'm down here in my little room. I have like a podcast pseudo office room that I created for myself since moving up to Northern California in July. And there's, it's put together pretty nicely. The room's pretty nicely put together. And over there on my shelf, it's, as I'm speaking to you, is my National Board of Medical Examiners of the United States of America diploma. So I'm looking at that's my board, that's it. I guess not. That's a medical examiner's. It's a little bit different. That's a little bit different. Okay. So we can strike that, but let's leave it in the tape, because I'm going to make this mistake for real. And that is, I'm reminded that, what it took for me to pass boards, or what it took for me to make my MedCat scores world class, which I also did just like you, by the way. They were average, but that wasn't going to get this guy into medical school. And so I did Stanley Kaplan, and then, by taking the proper amount of time to look at how to do those MedCats, my MedCat scores just soared through the roof. And then I was, undeniable as a medical school student candidate or something. There's an opportunity to get, why did we do this? What are we doing here? 60, 62 years old. What are we doing? What's the deal here? And, I look back to the day, the cookie cutter day too, so often, including already a few times today. I just assume stop doing this junk. That's enough already. I want real life. I want to do something.
Right.
And here I am. And literally, seriously, I've had 4 conversations today that have literally altered children's worlds, talking to their moms and, truly, seriously altering the course of their lives from the core up today already. It's not even noon yet. And I haven't even worked yet. This was just phone calls. And I don't know what I'm doing or why I'm doing it, but I'm called and I have simply nothing to do with it. Isn't that a great place to be? As just a source. I'm just a vessel for this conversation to occur. And let's face it, for this conversation to occur too, with me and you, because the impact that the two of us are making right now, we don't get to measure either. So as this conversation gets delivered, as ripples into the universe, you and I will never know what the impact of this conversation had on others. So thank you for being here, and thank you for sharing yourself, and thank you for really, really unloading who you are for not only this population, Janet, but really for the entire creative population of the planet, like what you really are as a stand for what it means to be alive.
Thank you. I thank you from the bottom of my heart. I to have an opportunity to speak about this into a listening of people who really want to hear it, and to be able to just, thank you for giving me the space to just run on. I know that you do these podcasts and you meet people wherever they are. And I've heard where you're really engaged and asking questions the whole way through. And you just gave me the freedom to just let it go. And often when I have a conversation like this with one person, and at the end of it, I have this experience like, I wish everybody could have heard what we just talked about. And you just made that possible. So thank you.
You're welcome. And thank you. So, Janet, I think we already have wound this down adequately, but is there a space of anything else you want to say in closing or in completion about, I don't know, the state of your space, or, what are you doing the rest of the day? How about that? What are you doing the rest of the day?
It's kind of funny. This morning I was thinking, stepping into something new is always so scary, and how I was like, how am I going to, this is my debut. This is the first time I've ever done anything like this on this large a scale. I have spoken in front of small groups, or, in my growth and development work, I've been in front of, a couple hundred people, but that's a different context. So, and what occurred for me is that just following this, I get to be with my first patient. And so that's what my day is going to be, is being with people today. And then after that, hiking. We have beautiful mountains around here and ocean, and I'll be doing that. So that's how my day is going to go. And I just want to say there's a paper that's posted on there that I wrote a couple of years ago. So, if you happen to go on the website, for the listeners out there, if you know someone who is dealing with this, or you're dealing with this, and you want to share it, please do that. Because I've been, really surprised at how many people are surprised to hear this viewpoint about it. And it can really, even if it does nothing more than people just read it, it can give people a whole new, life to live into.
Beautiful. Absolutely. And I just reviewed that paper yesterday, and it's brilliant. So yeah, that's a great point. And so I invite anyone, and whether or not they know somebody or not, to take a peek at the paper. It's beautifully well written, and it really does encapsulize. And
Yes,
it's written 4 years ago, no?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you've kind of taken some giant steps from there, but you can really see the core tenets are essentially the same. The champion that you are, the determination that you are, the healed physician that you are, and it really comes out in that paper as well.
There's so much more that I could say, and that I'd say the one major area that has advanced since that paper is to the degree that I have people doing mindfulness practice, which has made a really huge difference. So, and then the other thing I wanted to tell you is that what I'll be doing during the day is I have a cat. He's he's an adolescent cat, and I used to have lots of animals, and then the last one I lost a couple of years ago, and my daughter brought this one to me, and I was like, how am I gonna do all this and take care of a kitten? And anyway, he has brought so much play and joy into my life. So that's also something that happens is he'll be flying into my lap and out while I'm seeing caseloads.
I know. Well, you might know that we have 3 cats, and they are finest. Again, it's probably the third time today I've talked about the power of those cats on my life. I mean, these cats, in fact, I'm looking over my shoulder right now at Valentino on the couch behind me, and no human, he's just sleeping, and no human in the history of time has ever been as comfortable as Valentino is, right, to just having another moment in life right now. He is just a maven for beyond comfort. He's just like, dude, how did you find, I want what you have. And then in a moment, he'll be mischievous, or he'll be fighting the other cats, or he'll be meowing for food, or looking out the window at a fly, or whatever he's doing. And, and he's not even the best of the 3. All 3 of them are just amazing. So I can't speak enough about the power of feline energy to keep me rooted in my own humanity. So I love
Very
cats.
Well said. Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, Janet. Well, I think that's it for now. I think that's it until next time. I do have so many things I want to talk to you offline about, and I think I'm going to save it for offline. I think it's not necessarily for the listeners, at least not right now. I think it could be. And so, but I want to root it in a one-to-one conversation. So we'll have that shortly. And it's been a deep and honest honor and pleasure and privilege to have you on the Welcome to Humanity podcast today. And listeners, you see what I'm saying? It's like, I just get to come on here. I just get to invite people who are super excited to come here and share their lives. And then we all get to share their extraordinary nature. We all get to share what it is to be an extraordinary, like a spectacular human being. And can you see that in this case, and in nearly every case, there's a string of ordinariness that runs the whole extraordinariness that is Janet Flaton. And, talk about relate or talk about resonate. I think if you're human, there's so much of what Janet had to share that you too can relate and resonate with, and be really happy to be on the same planet as Janet Flaton. And I know I am. And Janet, again, thank you for coming on this podcast episode. It's been a pleasure, and we'll talk soon. You're welcome. Bye for now. And listeners, we'll catch you on the next episode. Thanks for listening. Take care. Hey, listeners, thank you so much for tuning in today. Janet is a really good friend of mine, and it's someone, who we've grown together, and we really got to see today that we're alike in so many ways, and we really are up to similar things. But I'm just so impressed with who she gets to be in the world, and who she gets to be for people with this diagnosis, and who she gets to be for, really, just making a difference as a physician on the cutting edge, and really being out of the box and exploring new ways to look at old conversations. And I'm so aligned with that. And I hope that this brought as much new ideas, much joy and pleasure as it did for me. And if you want to contact Dr. Flaton in any way, please make sure to visit her website at labeltoleader.com. That's LABELTOLEADER.com. It'd be really, really great if you wanted to follow her, and I know I'm going to do that. You might know that some people out there really had to hear this particular episode. And so what I'd like to ask for a favor from you, is go ahead and take a moment and subscribe. Go ahead and take a moment and review. And that way, once you subscribe, I'll be able to get to you all the latest episodes. Subscribes and reviews are the best 2 ways to spread the word about Welcome to Humanity podcast. To catch up on past episodes, go on over to welcometohumanity.net/podcast. Thanks again for listening. Have a beautiful day. It's been a pleasure. Bye for now, y'all.